Okay, we are going to talk about functions of harmony, chord progressions, and a little bit about modulations. So to review, we have a scale here starting on C and ending on the C above it. The scale degree numbers get translated into Roman numerals, as we talked about last time, but these scale degrees also have special names that we've kind of started to talk about in terms of the tonic note, which is the first note, and a little bit about the dominant. So the three most important notes in a major scale for right now is this tonic, which in this case would be C, the dominant, which is the fifth scale degree, and the leading tone, which is the seventh scale degree. So we're going to talk a lot about that today and kind of unpack what this all means. So we have to talk about pitch stability and leading tones when we talk about harmony. And that involves going back and reviewing a little bit about intervals. So some intervals are close together, like a minor second, and there are some intervals that are far apart, like an octave. In Western music, we want to hear consonant intervals as opposed to dissonant ones. So it doesn't really mean that dissonant intervals are necessarily unpleasant sounding or, far apart. But we'll kind of unpack what dissonant and consonant means. Dissonant intervals build tension. So there could be an interval that's far apart. Let's say an interval of a tenth that sounds like it would just be dissonant. But if we start on C and we count up 10 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that's not so bad sounding. So dissonant intervals build tension, and listeners usually want the sound to resolve. Dissonant intervals are also less stable than consonant intervals. So let's take a look at some consonant intervals. We have our unison, which is just the same note. We have a minor third. That's consonant. It doesn't, in our sort of Western culture, a minor interval may not sound as happy to us because we're used to it being in sad songs, but it's still consonant. It doesn't have that feeling of wanting to resolve. It sounds very settled. So we have a major third. Okay, now we're getting up to perfect fifth. It sounds very stable and grounded. That also sounds stable and grounded. That's our minor sixth. Now here's our major sixth, also sounding very stable. So let's take a step back and look at dissonant intervals. Our minor second, very unstable. Major second, still pretty unstable. Now let's take the minor seventh, which is C to B flat. Major seventh, yowza, that is unstable. And last but not least, our very dissonant, evil spirit evoking interval, the tritone. So all of these dissonant intervals are very close to consonant intervals, and the theory is that our ears want that sound to resolve to a more consonant interval. Of course, this is just in the context of Western music, so those intervals could be considered consonant in other musical traditions, but this is just Western music theory as it is right now. For an example, a perfect fourth, we didn't talk about a perfect fourth, but that actually used to be considered dissonant back in like the medieval times. So those are perfect fourths. Now we kind of consider it more consonant. It's just the change in the aesthetic and how it's used in the music. So very interesting about consonants and dissonance. I'm not going to play either of the videos that are in this PowerPoint right now, but I expect that you will go and listen to them and watch them and try to make sense of what they are saying. So this video explains the overtone series, and the next video is the overtone series as it applies to the perfect fifth interval and the circle of fifths phenomenon. So moving on, we're going to start talking about 1 and 5 chords. So we're going to be living in C major, and these diagrams that I've included in this PowerPoint show, the relationship between the chords and how most often they resolve. This little dotted arrow coming from the tonic means that any chord could come after the tonic, like in the area to the right of this arrow, but that just simply means that it would be followed by the fifth chord here, or the dominant. So let's just take this for an example. We have our dominant chord in the key of C major. So to find the dominant chord, we count up from C. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we are here on the G major chord. And then we resolve to the C chord. So you're kind of always hearing that dominant tonic motion in every kind of Western, very much so in like the classical, the Baroque, the classical, even into the Romantic period. It's just always kind of used to end a phrase. And in the bass, we see the bass motion. Sol, do, that interval of a perfect fifth. I should also mention that we have here, if you can look at the little highlighted arrow, that B natural moves to the C. And if we were doing this in solfege, we would have T, do. So T to do is our half step motion there. And you're always wanting to resolve it up to the tonic note. All right, so now we're looking at the 2 chord. The 2 chord occurs as in the key of C major as a D minor triad. So here I'll play this progression. Or if I took the bass line and moved the C down an octave, as you can tell, that's a very stable chord progression, and it has some interesting little inner workings here that I want to point out. So the top note of the D minor triad would be our La, La, Ti, Do. So you're resolving up in a scale-wise pattern. And also the bass line here moves in perfect fourths and perfect fifths. We'll talk about the significance of the perfect fourth being the inversion of a perfect fifth, but that comes when we talk about inversions. So this is probably a lot of information. So I'm just going to go through the next few chord progressions. This features our 6th chord, a minor 6th chord in the chord progression, which would be an A minor chord. So here's how this whole thing sounds. Now we have the 3 chord, the minor 3, and this is how this one would sound. So we start on E. As you can see, we have two instances of leading tone motion from ti to do and again in ti to do. So that's kind of significant. And as you can see, if we just isolate the bass line, we're moving down in perfect fifths. Finally, we have the 7 chord and the 4 chord that kind of are interchangeable here. So, the 7 chord and the 5 chord are interchangeable. The 4 chord is actually interchangeable with the 2 chord. So I want to show you how this one sounds. This is going to feature the 4 chord going to the 7 chord going to the 1 chord. So we start on F major. That sounds a little bit awkward in root position, but when you invert it, it does make it sound a little bit more smooth. And as you can see in the bass line, you have an interval of a tritone. So that is not the most effective way to write these chords, but for this video's sake, we're just going to do everything in root position. I also wanted to point out with the 7th chord, there is actually 2 half-step resolutions. So we have ti to do, B natural to C. Then we actually have one going the opposite direction from F natural to E natural. So if we were doing it in solfege, we would have a ti, do resolution and a fa to mi. Doesn't that sound lovely? So finally, we're going to talk about the 4 chord as it is interchangeable with the 2 chord. So you can plug in a 4 chord where you would normally have a 2 chord, and it kind of serves the same function. The same way you can plug in a 7 diminished chord with in the place of a 5 chord. So here we go with our 4 chord. We have an F major chord, G major, and C. And we have that same la, ti, do motion going on there. So that's pretty much all I have for this video. I'm sure this will yield a lot of questions, so we'll go over them in the lesson this week. But hopefully this helps, and feel free to go through this multiple times. Check out YouTube videos that might explain this a different way, but this is the harmonic sequence based on the circle of fifths.